Welcome to the EU Sustainable Energy Week session on energy transition, digitalisation and cybersecurity. I'm Una Shorthall and I'm from the EU Agency of Energy Regulators, ACER. And I'm pleased to welcome today four great speakers. We have from the European Commission, Paolo Pinov, Director in DG Energy. We have beside her, just to the right of her here, we have Konstantinos Milano, who is a cyber expert from the EU Agency for Cybersecurity, ENISA. To his right here, we have from ENSO-E, we have Nicolas Richet. And last but not least, at the very end, we have from the distribution system operators, the EU DSO entity, Peter Vermaat. So warm welcome to you. Besides hearing from our experts today, we're going to have a fairly interactive session. So we will be using Slido, not just yet, but in a little while. So we want you to answer a few audience polls for us, both here in the room here in the Charlemagne, but also online. And that's how we'll take your questions as well. Plenty of time for questions. We'll have a good 35 to 40 minutes at the end of the session to take all your questions. So please put them in through the Slido question and answers. But before we get to that, I'll set the scene with a few words on each of the three topics. So the first one being transition, the energy transition. The EU has set itself a very ambitious climate objective for the year 2030. And the ultimate objective is, of course, climate neutrality, or carbon neutrality, I should say, by 2050. Now, the Green Deal is the strategy to get us there, and that cuts across every element of society, every sector, including energy. But let's zoom in a bit on the energy transition and what that means. The energy transition means decarbonising the energy sector. So that means moving away from fossil fuels towards low carbon and renewable energy sources. Why? Well, at the heart of the energy transition is the need to really cut greenhouse gas emissions in the energy sector in the fight against climate change. Why? Because energy accounts for 75% of the EU greenhouse gas emissions. So by decarbonising energy, we're making a really important step forward towards our 2030 goals. Furthermore, using clean energy then helps other sectors to decarbonise, such as transportation or heating. But the transformation in the energy sector to tackle the challenges of climate change requires what I would call profound changes in the economy and society. So it will impact significantly the way, not just that we generate energy, but how we use and how we interact with it in our daily lives. And that's for you and me as well as citizens. So be it through our smart homes, microgeneration, how we move about, transport, how we fuel our cars. So it really means profound changes, and importantly, how we engage as well with the energy markets. So to be effective, the energy transition really needs to include us as consumers. So that means enabling you and I as citizens to play our part as well alongside the different sectors towards this path of achieving a really sustainable and carbon neutral world. So more renewable energy sources is really important, but it's not enough. We really must rethink all the ways that we contribute to climate change. So be it through manufacturing, transportation and heating, for example. So the energy transition is the real enabler. So it's what I would call truly transformational. And that brings me to the second topic, which is digitalisation. So digitalisation of the energy sector plays a key role in the energy transition. For decades, people like Peter and Nicola here have been really modernising their grids and using digital technology to optimise operations. So we are seeing electricity grids are now modernised into smarter grids and facilitating more distributed generation. What does that help these grid operators to do? It helps them better understand the status of the energy systems and to adapt its configuration for better efficiency, and basically to keep the energy system and grids stable and reliable. And this happens every single millisecond. And that's thanks to very complex digitalized energy system. And behind that, of course, the workforce, the energy professionals that are running the grids. But digitalization is not just about enhancing the uptake of energy digital technologies, and we had a very interesting session just immediately before this. It's also about the data that's generated by that smart technology and getting that not just to the network operators, but also to the market participants. And that's important because we want energy digitalization to benefit consumers, benefit them through new business models, through new services and products. So bring the consumers themselves along on the energy transition. So engaging energy consumers through digitalization is really a win-win, both for the consumers and also for the entire system. So that brings me to the third and final point you'd be glad to hear, which is cybersecurity. So digitalization brings huge benefits, but it also brings certain challenges and risks. And when I say those risks are really linked to the increased possibility to tamper with the digital layer of generating electricity and transporting electricity and energy across the system. So from this, we need to really take care not just to enhance the digitalization, but also to safeguard that digital layer to make sure that we support the grid and the underlying, the entire electricity and energy systems. And by that I mean having adequate cybersecurity rules and practices in place. And we'll hear more about that in a minute from our first speaker, but just to wrap it a bit up from my side, just 2 quick points. There's no clean energy transition without digitalization, and protecting this increasingly digitalized energy system from cyber attacks and cyber incidents is really important for security of supply. So we have the 3 legs of a stool, if you like. We have the energy transition, we have the digitalization, and we have the cybersecurity element, and we need the 3 to keep that stool up. Why? Because they're very interconnected and they're very interlinked and interdependent. So we'll explore these in more detail in a few minutes. But first, I want to ask you, the audience, a couple of questions yourselves. So we'll move to the first poll. I invite you to get your smartphones out, and you should see a QR code. It's the easiest way to tap into it, and we'll have the first question. So your first question is about the clean energy transition. Is it about moving to new energy sources, a journey towards almost energy independent EU, very expensive, a mirage, or is it our commitment to clean and better life to future generations? Or do you prefer the good old energy of the past? Okay, we invite people both online and here in the audience to tap in. Okay. We see that the system is working anyway. We'll just give you one more second, and I think we have an overall winner here. So we're seeing that it's about people's commitment to ensuring a clean and better lifestyle to future generations. So that's an interesting one. Okay, that was a sort of a test run for you. We're going to have a second question now. So we'll take the second question, please. And this is because you're probably wondering who's sitting beside you here in the audience. So are they all energy experts, or are the cyber experts, or who's here? So this question has the next question. It's about the training. It's whether you've been on a training for energy system, cybersecurity training. Question 2. Okay, we seem to be having a problem with questions. Yes, So this is the one. When was the last time you got a cybersecurity training or participated in a cybersecurity exercise or awareness sharing program? So was it less than 1 year ago, less than 2 years ago, last month, 8 months ago, or maybe it is never. Maybe this doesn't apply to you. And just an interesting fact, while we're sat here in the Charlemagne building, we have about 100 experts from the different institutions, EU institutions, following cybersecurity training this week. So, okay, so we see we have quite a few experts here in the room. So I'm going to hand you over now to Konstantinos, because he is our cybersecurity expert from the EU Agency of Cybersecurity. So over to you, Konstantinos. You want to take my spot up here for a moment? And this will enlighten you as to who you're going to be talking to. He's going to tell us a little bit about the cyber landscape in general and in particular, of course, for energy sector.
The lightning came from one of the answers when you received for the last time training, and the answer was in another life. So
life.
This was very
well, that's for you to comment on that.
Yeah, indeed. You know, every year ENISA is performing kind of a survey across Europe. We ask around 900 operators of essential services, including energy operators across Europe, concerning this very important issue, training. And we have found this year that more than 70% of operators are interested in receiving trainings, and they are keen, so to speak, and they believe that more training is good for increasing the cybersecurity of their functions. Yeah, but of course training is only one part, I would say, of the difficult to solve equation concerning cybersecurity in the energy sector, because when we're talking about energy, together with telecommunications, we should be sure that we're talking about the two most critical sectors of our society, and not only for themselves, but also for other sectors, because long disruptions, for example, in the energy might pose problems and have a great impact in other sectors, like, for example, health. Imagine that for a hospital that for some time does not have power. So what might mean for some human lives. Anyway, apart from its importance, energy sector and energy grid is developing. As soon as said, for this reason, a significant role play the new business models, is of course mostly coming from the distribution side, which on the other as a consequence brought new technologies aside, the mixing with old technologies, with internet. All these combinations created a very complicated system. I would say that a power grid today is even more complicated than telecommunication networks, with many different assets, which the operators have this challenge, first of all, to understand where all these assets are. Based on the survey that I mentioned before, for this year for the energy sector, around 17% of the sectors said that they couldn't have an asset repository in order to manage these assets. So you can imagine that if you don't know what are your assets, how can you manage? Of course, the incidents on the energy sector are not a new, so to speak, is not a new trend. We have experienced incidents in the energy sector in the past, namely, perhaps you recall the attacks against the power grid of Ukraine in 2016 with black energy, the Colonial Pipeline in 2020 in the States, the very well-known gas company in the United States. And this year we had this Intersat event, a few days after the UA and Russia conflict, where it resulted to 10,000 of renewable devices being stopped, not working, not functioning, due to an attack to the satellite ground internet facility from Russia. So just in order for you to understand the magnitude, in the past we had only a limited number of incidents for the energy sector. The last 60 days, there are 6 very well-known incidents reported, not only 20s, of course, but in the public, in the social media, attacking European countries like Greece, Italy, Luxembourg, Poland, and so on and so forth. All these attacks were ransomware attacks. For those, ransomware is an attack where the hacker asks for some ransoms in order to decrypt some data, in order not to decrypt and publish some data. So you see that ransomware is a key trend. According to ENISA threat landscape last year, ransomware was the #1 trend in cybersecurity threat. And our studies show that ransomware is here to stay. It will not go, so to speak, the next years. Of course, it will be superseded by another attack, which is in an increase the last few years, the supply chain attacks. And we expect that by 2030, ransomware attack, supply chain attacks for software will be the #1 attack against the whole cyber, including energy sector. So that is more or less a little bit not very enjoying shiny future for cyber. However, we have to stand close and stand by to the operators where at this complex environment, they have to first take some measures, be prepared, then they have to detect the attacks, and then they have to respond, and then they have to recover. Imagine these people working in a very complex environment, as we mentioned before. As I said, 17% they don't know exactly what are the assets. At the same time, they have to face all these problematic environment, which is complex, the requests from the management, and at the same time we have the obligations coming from the regulations like NS Directive. They have to report incidents, they have to collaborate with the competent authorities and national authorities. So, because the national authorities are the only ones that can provide some kind of intelligence to the operators so that they can understand where these attacks come from. I would like to close my intervention by saying that due to the fact that this environment is too complex, the only way to at least, I wouldn't say that we can mitigate or eliminate the risk, but we can at least increase the probability to withstand these attacks is to collaborate, to share information, valuable information, technical information with each other. The days that cybersecurity was a matter of single teams like the cybersecurity incident response teams have gone away. Now we need multitasking teams with of course, knowledge from the cyber, but also from the sector. And this collaboration is absolutely necessary in order to handle and share, first of all, share information and then handle these cybersecurity attacks. So by closing, I will say that ENISA, okay, I have to praise my organization, is in the center, I would say, of cybersecurity in Europe. We collaborate with key stakeholders like ENSO-E, with EUDSO, with ENSO-EG. We share information, and we try, that ENISA has a key role, a role in the coming network code as a facilitator for the early warning system. And we try to collaborate all this with all these stakeholders, with Acer, of course, so that we increase the level of knowledge across Europe concerning the threat assessment and, of course, the mitigation measures.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Konstantinos. Some interesting points there that I'm going to pull up with the ENSOs in a few minutes, no doubt. But let's go to our next poll, first of all. So it's question 3 on the seriousness of cyber attacks. So how would you assess the seriousness of a cyber attack on the energy sector? This is for our audience. While we're answering that, I'll invite Nicolas to take the podium here because he's up next. Thank you. Okay, so I think we're all agreed that people see it as a very serious issue, even if some are happy to survive a blackout for a couple of hours. Okay, so in that context, Nicolas, what can you tell us about what you're doing in terms of the network grids, and what about this remark as well that 70% don't know what the assets are that you have to protect?
So first, based on the poll, I think I'm going to sit down again because nothing that I'm going to tell here is going to be a big surprise. Apparently, it's a very informed crowd we have here. So I'll start my stopwatch because I know I have a 5-minute slot, so I'll do my best. Good afternoon. My name is Nicolas Richet. To move the slides. Yeah, thanks. And I work effectively for ENSO-E, so maybe just a very short introduction because it might not be obvious to everyone what ENSO-E is. So ENSO-E stands for the European Network of Transmission System Operators for Electricity. And this is the association of 39 TSOs, so transmission system operators located or operating in 35 countries. So basically that spans from Norway to Spain, if I go north to south, and from Ireland to choose what is the easternmost. So I picked Romania, but you could find others. We have Cyprus also as a member. And it's worth noting because that has connection to the legislative part of what we can do to mitigate risks. And the network code on cybersecurity is that you may have noticed 35 countries, so it's more than 27. So we have members from EU and non-EU countries. This grid we're talking about is the world's largest interconnected electrical grid. So somehow the most complex piece of engineering on Earth. Practically all the grids that are, so electrical grids, those networks that are operated by the transmission operators are connected live permanently across all this geography I have mentioned. By being connected, from one grid to another and close to, and so on. And yeah, the association is the organization within which the cooperation and collaboration is organized to cover from milliseconds, which is the time span for electricity, somehow to decades ahead of time. Okay. So the topic was about what do we do to coordinate actions to protect critical assets. So in order to cover that, the topic is about, cybersecurity at large. So those that are familiar with security, the famous triad on security, so confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And somehow, like our colleagues of the distribution level or people in the gas sector, somehow the cyber security aspect has been covered for a long, long time. It has started the very first time some smart electronics or IT have been introduced to support the power operation, the power system operations. Why that? Because keeping the lights on, or as I prefer to picture it, keeping the water flowing to your tap at home, because this is what is at stake if we are to face a major disruption of the electrical power system, okay, is that you don't get water anymore because you don't have a well in your garden, if you have a garden, for most of us. So this is what is at stake. You know, you can keep on running for some time without light, but without water, you're back to Stone Age in a matter of few days, very few weeks. So this is in the DNA of any persons dealing with the system operation. And risk identification and mitigation is really the essence of the job. Teams permanently run what-if scenarios to establish so-called N-1 plans, etc. So if you introduce a piece of equipment, IT and so on, it is looked as a possible risk source, and therefore looking after that has been of the essence forever. And wherever IT, hardware or softwares are involved, they are thoroughly tested, and based on risk analysis or on so-called failure modes, effects and criticality analysis, the proper redundancy and other mitigations are implemented. This is routinely done both at individual TSO level, but also across TSOs. Why that? Because as you can see it, in order to fulfill the mission of safe operation of the pan-European electrical power system, the TSOs and their regional coordination centers, the RCCs, run a number of critical intertwined processes supported by a variety of interoperable IT platforms. I'm already about short of time, so I need to rush a little bit. But basically what you see in the center of the slide is some of the critical processes that are run permanently for the planning of cross-border operations, so the operations between the TSOs. And all these processes that are mentioned here are supported by at least one major IT platform. Those ones that are pictured here are so critical that they interoperate by being connected to a communication network which is completely isolated from any other, namely internet or whatever else, okay? The paradigm shift that we have had to face, I told you we were taking care of this cybersecurity thing forever, is that before it was an engineering problem. It was about a piece of hardware going down or software. Here now we are facing malicious attacks, okay? So this is really the major change, and it has completely changed the dimension of the problems that we have to deal with. It is not anymore about just hardware malfunction or buggy software. It's about groups of state proxies that intentionally go after breaking the power system, not with bombs, but through IT. Okay, so basically we are talking about having a surface of attack that we want to take care of. So what do we do for that? Two just illustration, one from an organization standpoint on the right. We have internally a forum of experts where all the members and regional coordinations are present, the so-called cybersecurity working group, where permanently informations are exchanged. But we have also elements on operations, and I've mentioned on the left the SEAM tool, so most of you know what this is. This is a platform that gathers information coming from the system, the logs coming from the system of the most critical platforms, and they are monitored permanently to anticipate on risk and mitigate. But we, of course, very much welcome now the arrival of a new piece of legislation, the Network Code on Cybersecurity. As a matter of fact, with our colleagues of EUDSO, we have provided a major contribution, I believe, with ACER and the Commission to prepare the proposal that has been progressively reviewed on that. And for us, it's very welcome because we know as TSOs we cannot save the world alone. We need to work with the other parts of the value chain of the system, and with that we have a framework to together be on the good basis. So in a conclusion, the network code is very welcome. It will help us consistently and jointly identify through cyber risk assessment the most critical processes. And we know that we cannot solve the world alone, and the threat is permanent, so it's not about preparing for war. The war is on that side. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Just while we're changing speakers, we're going to take another quick audience poll. So our next question is about digitalization, if we can pull that one up. So how do you rate the current level of digitalization in the energy sector? Too much? Good? Great experience? Pick your answer. Okay, and with that, I'm going to invite Peter Vermaat from the EU DSO entity up, because he's the guy who's closer to us as consumers. So they're running the distribution grids and the most interconnected points, as you can imagine, much more than at the transmission level. So he's going to bring us through that, Peter.
Okay, thank you. When preparing this session, our moderator, Una, asked me to elaborate on cyber, but also a bit widen the perspective on the other elements you introduced to us. So I'll give a brief introduction on cyber and then gradually shift to the other topics on energy transition and digitization as well. But before doing that, indeed, elaborating a bit on what Una introduced, DSO entity is a new entity representing the, let's say, low and medium voltage grids throughout Europe in a European mandate to work on network codes and guidelines. We are here since just a bit more than a year, representing over 900 distribution system operators in 27 countries all over the European Union, comprising, in fact, 250 million consumers connected to our grid. So together with our colleagues from ENTSO-E, we try to run, I think you gave a very nice summary, the most complex engineered system on Earth. So it's quite a challenge. Now, going into a bit more detail on the cybersecurity, it was already introduced by Nicolai that together we have worked on a new code, introducing also the core products for the new code to be implemented, like the risk assessment cycle that we will run together with all companies throughout Europe, the cybersecurity mechanisms that we use, also risk-based, and also the sharing of information, so being informed about actual threats, also demonstrated by Mr. Konstantinos. And if you zoom out a little bit and you imagine, let me check, I need one more, I think. Shouldn't be, yeah, okay. So if you zoom out a bit and you imagine what it means if we are expanding the grid into the digital age and into the new energy system of the future, it is millions of devices that will be connected, but that are also digitalized, right? So it's not only the traditional energy suppliers, but also new parties like aggregators or energy service companies. And imagine the vast amount of solar panels, electric vehicles, any other device that has any digitized connection to the grid. So it's really an exponentially growing number of activities and stakeholders that we need to take care of. And I think the impact of that has been illustrated very well also in the introduction from ENTSO-E. So when we widen the perspective from cybersecurity to the wider area that DSOs are elaborating, I think we can easily understand that the DSOs will play a central role. Not only because of recent knowledge, 70% of renewables will be injected into the local grid. It's also because the system needs to change from a more passive managed system into an active operated system. So it's also a different way of operating that the DSO companies need to develop. And last but not least, being at the last mile, we are the connection to the consumers. And we think that enabling the consumer to participate in energy transition and to participate in not only consuming but also producing energy will drive energy transition forward. So that brings a lot of challenges, but fortunately also opportunities for DSOs. So we need to integrate the renewables into the grid and still maintain stability. And consumers can help, right? So there are the challenges of managing the variable renewable sources, the grid stability and safety and cyber, the investment planning for huge investments in expanding and smartening the grid. On the other hand, we are helped by digitization, by flexibility that can be provided by consumers, and also by a very good cooperation between DSOs and TSOs on a holistic planning. And that's what we need. Because if we look at energy transition, we really see that deep digitization is required. If you look at it from a distance, in effect, we are changing a one-way system into a two-way system that requires and produces massive amounts of data to be managed and maintained. So that requires deep digitization, and I think it is very clear that cybersecurity is of paramount importance to guide and safeguard this system in the future. So that is where we are at the moment, and I leave it to Una to further lead you to the next speaker and intervention. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Peter. And for your last chance today, you're going to have another final question. And this is, if we can bring up the final question, please, for our audience. So what's your perception of how far we are on the path to a predominant use of renewable energy and carbon neutral energy source? And I'm asking you that question just as we're going to introduce Paola Pino from DG Energy. And she's responsible for the just transition. And it's a tough just transition at the moment, Paola, with high energy prices. So where are we on that path, and what's in front of us? But let's just take in what we're seeing here in terms of where we believe, the audience believe we're on the path. Okay, I think we can close it off now. We seem to have a majority of people saying it's early stages. We seem to be on the right track. And a bit of optimism there as well that we will be reaching the 2030 and 2050 targets. So Paola, over to you. Would you like to come up here?
Yeah, or
as you like. Yeah. Musical chairs tonight.
Yeah. Thank you, Una, and good afternoon again for those of you who I already met earlier this afternoon. But this time, I hope to hear more from you than you hear from us. So that we'll come to that, and I look forward. Indeed, Una, there can be no energy transition without digitalization. Decarbonization is about energy transition, and therefore decarbonization is about digitalization. And we've seen that, and I had mentioned this before, that precisely digitalization can contribute to really empower consumers, to make them active participants of the energy system by decentralizing even the production of energy. So it allows consumers to play an active role in the management of the energy system. It allows them even to reduce the energy costs, which is so critical today. And it allows them even to provide additional revenues if they sell the electricity they're producing back into the grids. So it is a very powerful tool in terms of empowering the consumers, but we need to pay attention because in some instances it can also be an obstacle for all those who are not literate in digitalization aspects. And we need to cater for that also as part of the overall concern about ensuring a just transition, a fair transition for everyone. The famous slogan, which should be much more than a slogan, of leaving no one behind. So we are working actively on that, and to make sure that it's not just about, that we're not just tackling energy poverty, but that we're also tackling any deficiencies in terms of really being able to make the best out of the digitalization. Because as we've heard from the colleagues in the panel, the potential is such that I really am jealous of all those who have been following the training now, not just on digitalization, but on cybersecurity, because this should really become a part of all our education. As we've seen, its digitalization is much more than the smart meters. We tend to associate digitalization, smart meters, I can connect to that, but Peter just showed us it's really across the value chain. And so in order to really seize its benefits, we really also need to have the necessary education. And education is a challenge across the board. It's not at high level when we're talking about cybersecurity and those who deal with the electricity grid system or gas. It's also when we are talking about awareness of everyone, and indeed should be promoted very early on. And then it's about the experts, because the network code, for instance, has been mentioned here, and we are together with the representatives of key institutions sitting here today working on this network code on sector-specific rules for cybersecurity in electricity, but it's very difficult to find experts on cyber. It's a mega challenge. So if I can give you a piece of suggestion, if you are still keen in finding an area where certainly there will be a lot of demand, and for your children, those who have them in education, this is certainly an area where clearly there is much more demand than there is offer. And it's a real difficulty in finding the experts who actually put together, for instance, also the legislation that is necessary to make sure that we have a context which is conducive to all of us feeling confident that we can make all use of digitalization, and that behind there are experts who are taking care of every single step in the system. And the good thing is when everything is running smoothly and we don't even hear about it. And beware, Konstantinos mentioned, there are many more cyber attacks, for instance, than we actually hear of. And that's a very good sign. It means that it's being effectively, efficiently dealt with behind the screens and behind the scenes by those few experts who really know a lot about it. And for me, for us in the Commission, it has been very encouraging to see over time how all these experts are coming together, are having a dialogue. ENSOE, ENSOG, ENISA, the DSOs now, because it's all part of the same. And when we're talking about energy infrastructure, we are talking about critical infrastructure. And the events over the past hours you may have been following remind us of this. In a given pipeline, which is having some leaks over in the past hours. It's critical infrastructure. If anything happens, it is serious, be it for the safety of it, be it even for the environmental safety, the climate safety, as is in this case. And it's just not just the gas pipelines, the physical infrastructure, it's also the software which now goes into it. Therefore, from my side, really an expression of satisfaction in seeing how much is happening, how much is happening also behind the scenes, and how much still needs to happen. And I said, it has been mentioned here several times, the network code, really to make sure that we can trust that if we proceed in this digitalization journey that we have embarked in, that it is safe at all steps of the journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. I'll let you take your seat back here, and we're inviting you to put in your questions. So you can do this through the Slido poll, Slido questions and answers. And we have several coming in already. So, but before we check out the first one there, I really want to get back to something that Constantino said a while ago, and I did put our colleague here, Nicolas, on the alert that this one was going to come. What is this story about 17% of the assets that we don't even know about? How can we protect the assets because you're not just talking about IT infrastructure and IT assets, it's also the operational technology assets as well.
Yeah. Nicolas?
No, I was going to ask if you can elaborate a little bit on the type of assets you're referring to before.
Yeah, it's yes, the question was generic, was not specific. You know, the problem comes from the coexistence of old technology and IT, new technology. You know, with the introduction of new technologies, there are specific protocols, technologies that you can use in order to manage your network. However, the old technologies, you know, in the grid, you can find technology 40 years old. They cannot speak, so to speak, this kind of communication protocols. And this is why it's difficult for an operator to develop a solution which covers its own asset inventory. However, there are mitigation techniques like you know, defense in depth, we call it in traditional information system security. You can find mitigation measures which prevent for the hacker to reach the elements which are not very new, so to speak. They are a little bit legacy systems and so on. This is the most widely known technique that the experts use for this. But this is only a sign, you know, an evidence to understand the difficulty of, you know, managing an energy grid, which is huge. You know, in some countries, it crosses from one point of the country to the other. So, or using a mix of old technologies and new technologies, and this is where the problem comes from.
So effectively, it's a key point that has been disputed even in what the efforts we did together with the Commission also prior to working on the network code. There was the Smart Grid Task Force Expert Group 2, was it? And effectively, this mix of legacy items that are in use to operate the grid at large, and of very new technologies is a major, I would say, challenge. And again, we are talking here about a continuum that, as mentioned by my colleague of EUDSO, goes from your toaster at home to nuclear power plants. This is electrically connected, okay? So if you manage to disrupt, you know, for example, electrical vehicles, chargers in a coordinated manner, those are connected to the distribution level in all the countries. You manage to coordinate that, you can create a disruption to the whole system. So of course, if you want to do that with toasters, you really need to be, you know, massive. But joke aside, effectively, we have this. So at the time of this Smart Grid SFL2, it was one of the key elements of the specificity of the electrical grid, with other elements like the cascading effect, the fact that a small disruption can then add 2 others in a chain, and eventually come to an issue. Like in 2006, there was a ship in the north of Germany that hit a high voltage line, and that progressively, at the time where the renewable assets connected to the grids didn't have all the protection that they're supposed to have now, that it had this kind of snowball effect, you know. So these are effectively specificities. Now, I will not elaborate further to Konstantinos. There are techniques to mitigate that, but it's a complexity in this system that, again, is made of billions of elements that more and more have some element of smartness in it, but some of them dating from decades ago to more recent that maybe have protection but are much more complex, so inherently bring an additional surface of attack. This is typically the complexities we have to deal with.
Okay, so in terms of the Internet of Things and all of these, much more, we're seeing many more connected devices. That extends the landscape, the threat landscape, essentially.
It does, and by the way, the recent announcements on making more secure the IoT and so on make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's not fun, it's a pain in the whatever you want, but we cannot, you know, we cannot forget about it.
Yeah, just 2 weeks ago, the European Commission proposed what's called the Cyber Resilience Act, and the idea of that is any products with a digital element, they will be better protected by that act. And we've been talking, there's a raft of legislation and rules behind all of this. We talked earlier about the network code. The network code is something specific to cross-border electricity, and it was developed by the TSOs, the distribution system operators, and NSOE on the basis of guidance provided by ACER, our organisation, and the current status of that is it's with the Commission at the moment reviewing is it intact, and we expect maybe towards the end of the year. Would that be right, Paula? What's the time frame?
Between the end of the year and early next year.
Okay. Okay, and in parallel to that, of course, we have the NIS2 directive. NIS1 is the directive on network and information security, and that covers all cybersecurity across the sectors. Well, looking at the critical infrastructure, I'm sure Konstantinos would correct me, but so that was about 8 different sectors, and now we have the NIS2 because of some loopholes, should I say, or but also the landscape has moved on. We're in a different era now than we were back in 2016. And that is, we had some good developments back in May, where the European Parliament and the Council agreed informally on the NIS2 directive. And what's the timeline on that one, Konstantinos? Is that when NIS2?
As far as I know, before the end of the year, this is the vision, so to speak.
Yep.
If everything goes well in the final stage, which is a final reading from the Parliament and the Council.
And this extends the scope of the obligations. So it's no longer, it's not just on network operators, on generators, on specific areas. It includes much more within its scope as well, including government and public administrations at regional level, for example, and different sectors like health, safety, space. There's many more covered by the NIS2 directive. Okay, so we had some interesting questions coming up there a moment ago, and one was about the legal aspect of the energy transition. Maybe we could pull up the questions from the audience, the first questions. What would the panel say are the biggest legal challenges of the energy? I'm going to have to ask you this one, Paula.
The biggest legal challenges. To be honest, when I think of challenges of the energy transition, there are many which occur to me. The legal ones are not the biggest ones for once. For once, even though, and we are trying. Well, we have a big set of legislation which is currently being negotiated with the member states, with the Council, with the European Parliament, and of course we need to get it right. And we don't need to just get it right, we need to get it right and fast right. So I'd say that's almost the biggest challenge now, is to make sure that with all what comes with a legal proposal from the Commission and then going into the legislators with what it means in terms of compromises, in terms of reflecting the national specificities and finding a good solid landing zone for the whole of the EU. That as such is of course a challenge, but what is now more important is to get it through at the pace that we know is required in this absolute need to accelerate the transition. In fact, we are now learning the very tough way that had we done what we're doing now much faster and earlier, we would probably have prevented a number of problems that we are having now. So I think in terms of agreements, compromises, we'll find a way. We will get there despite the ambition, which is high. What is a challenge is the pace. On the other hand, we've seen record examples of adoption of legislation. Recently, I had never seen anything like that, proposed on the 20th of July by the Commission, a proposal on reducing demand of gas in order to prepare for the next winter, and endorsed by member states 6 days later, and in force 2 weeks later. That's pretty much a record. So where there is a way, there is a way. Where there is a will, there is a way. And I want to believe that, unfortunately, for the wrong reasons, and because we're facing such a challenge, we will be overcoming also the legal difficulties.
Okay, we just have a few minutes left. I'm going to ask a question here, which is the first question. A number of people are asking this, and this is, despite all our efforts, some attacks will be successful, and how do we handle that successful cyber attack and resilience? Peter, I'm going to ask you this one.
Yeah, okay, and probably ENSOE has some advice on it as well, but indeed, I think it's a very interesting and good observation, because in our approach to cybersecurity, prevention is one chapter, but indeed resilience and recovery is another one. And I think that on recovery, there are two aspects that are very important. In the first stage, we should be able to isolate an incident as quickly as possible. And then from there on, we should also be able to restore the system in a very controlled way. And indeed, it's not an easy exercise, but I think it is a wishful thinking, put it in other words, that not any attack will be successful. So putting efforts in restoring is all the more important.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm French, so it's not about cheese or dessert, it's cheese and dessert, okay? So yes, it's trying to avoid it. It happens, but it's also handling such situations. It's developing on the long term the proper education and training, so that we get across the years the necessary amount of experts in Europe, so that we don't have to depend on others. It is, yes, bringing up the awareness, the education of, you were talking about, digital literacy and so on, but practically, effectively, being sensitive. Just as we are sensitive to, don't drink when you drive, it's also, don't give my credentials to someone that asks them. Those very basic things. But you may have smiled, but many of the incidents start by some phishing exercise and so on that could be prevented with very basic, safety things, such as buckling your seatbelt in your car and things like that. So it's all of this. And of course, incident, it's not, I always told to my stakeholders, it's not an if, it's a when. So if not today, it's going to happen tomorrow or the next day. So of course, yes, indeed, absolutely.
Okay.
Now, may I
Please,
just
very quickly, because we have 1 minute.
on that issue with the education, I would like to mention that last week, ENISA published its own energy-related cyber campaign on ransomware. You can find it at the ENISA website. And as Nicolas said, it's about basics about ransomware, but it's a start, that people can see there, can visit the ENISA website, see some videos, and play games, and things like that, so that people becomes more aware of the details of ransomware.
Okay, so I think that's a nice way to finish up. We've heard from the experts here today, these twin objectives of green transition, digital transition. Paula has really underlined that we need to be pushing these at the same time. It's about securing the digitalization for the energy transition, and it's about all of us working together, not just the TSOs, the DSOs, the agencies here, but it's us as citizens as well, being more aware and more cognizant of what's happening, that cyber is on the rise. Okay. Well, I'm told we have another few minutes. If anybody has any question, any last question that they would like to pose or not. I'm not sure we can take it through you can try it through the microphone. It's not allowing. If you can, we've got a technician who might help you.
Thank you. Yeah, it works. I have a question for Paula. My name is Paul de Wit. I work for Alliander, Dutch distribution system operator. The action plan to digitalize the energy system, does it take security into consideration, especially security by design, something that you don't centralize too much and do it in a distributed way? Is that part of the digitalization action plan, or could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, the security of the design comes then also with the question of the standardization. And I mentioned before, in digitalization, interoperability will be absolutely key. So it is very important to have the necessary standards in place. And hopefully we'll not be doing the same mistakes as we've done in the past, where depending on where you find yourself in the world, you will have different standards for different electric appliances. So it's very important. It's one of the examples that I give as an area where we should really promote international cooperation and really developing international standards for the design of the system. And we don't go into much details in the Energy Action Plan, but we put it forward as something that, of course, needs to be taken up by the competent authorities.
Okay, I have a question, maybe for a prediction question for some of you. And Konstantinos, I'm going to start with you. You've brought us around the world there a bit in some of the different cyber attacks and incidents that happen. Can you predict, given your expertise, what sort of the threat landscape is going to look like ahead of us from what you're seeing maybe from other sectors, so that we can be better prepared?
You'll have to wait the publication of an ESA foresight, which comes in November. However, yes, the number one, as I mentioned before, we expect that will be the supply chain attacks in the software. If we see 5 years down the road. And of course, disinformation will continue. You know, disinformation and campaigns are very useful tools for attackers, you know, to confuse people around specific issues. For example, for the efficiency of energy in Europe, you know, someone can launch a disinformation campaign against this. These are the two highest priorities, so to speak. But for the rest, as I said, in less than 2 months, you will, ENISA will publish a very nice report for a foresight concerning the threats for the future.
Okay, and I have another question for you, Nicola, which is, there's such a range of assets to protect. Which ones are the right assets to protect? How are we going to identify which are the high priority ones, and maybe through the network code? Is there any guidance there that will help us or not?
So yes, there is. And in a nutshell, I mean, but most of the people here, I'm not going to tell them something new for them. It's risk-based. So you analyze what may go wrong. depending on the assessment you do on possible threats. So threats in the terms when it comes to malicious, but also, as I mentioned, for a long time I also looked where the glitches can happen. But for the malicious part, you look at the risk what may happen, and then you look what are your assets that are the most critical, and this is the basis to do the evaluation of where you put your priorities and your money. And so, voilà, it's again nothing new. It's establishing the hierarchy of risks and protecting your most critical assets first, and then the rest. But again, here the problem is very complex because of the size of the system, and effectively the topics such as cascading effects and the very more and more distributed smartness, so to say, of the assets that make up the power system.
Okay.
But the network code does come with tools that will enable to work across the actors that make up the power grid, and to have consistent analysis and to look at this cross-border, but also I would say cross-operators issues, so that we make sure that we are not too siloed, and we look the effects of an issue on one side to the other side and to the overall system. It's a systemic approach.
Okay. And Peter, you're the entity that, and your members are the entities that are closer to the consumers. What does the EUSEW Directive and the network code mean for them in terms of stepping up?
Yeah, well, I must admit that I'm not a specialist of the NIS2 directive, but in general, I would say that there are sort of two sides of the coin. On the one hand, the DSOs need to design and protect the system. On the other hand, the awareness of consumers, it was clearly illustrated also by the other panelists, the awareness of the vulnerability of the system and what you can do yourself to protect, I would say as a sort of societal obligation, that you have the obligation to be aware of it and make your own behavior protect the energy system. I'm not exactly aware whether that is in the NIS2 directive or not, but it would be a very good advice, I think, for the whole of the society.
Okay, we're going to take one more question that we had from the audience, and I'm not sure whether it was a live audience or not, if you can show it again. So here's an interesting one. As digitalization increases and the attack vectors of malicious actors are developing, could a similar incident to the 2015 black energy happen in the future?
It's a matter of sword and shield. Each time you improve on one side, there is an improvement on the other side. And the point is to have the shield always at one step beyond the sword part. But yeah, if someone says, no, that could not happen, I mean, yeah, take the word of that person, and you can bet against it. Then it becomes philosophical. It's in the human nature that you always have the evil ones that, for whatever reasons, for fun, for greed, or for political or whatever geostrategic reasons, want to break the toy. So, yeah.
And Una, just to, of course, build on this. You asked me before for the threats after some years. We have a rise in the DDoS attacks again, although we thought that this is something that was in the past. Now we see DDoS attacks coming back. Denial of service, in a sense, because part of the attack in Ukraine was a denial. A part of it was a denial of service attack. So we have, so to speak, coming again. And of course, we have ransomware attacks, which remain a top priority together with supply chain attacks.
So in terms of the increase in the frequency of these attacks, why is this happening, though? Why?
The frequency?
Yeah.
Well, again, for me, it boils down to the fact that we operate the most critical infrastructure. Again, I'm back to the water, to the tap. If you ask in an elevator, what is the most critical commodity that you need, for you? Oh, water. Yeah, but here, in our so-called, civilized, quote, countries, water without electricity cannot happen. So if I am an enemy, or I plan to become an enemy, or I have to envisage that's for the sake of it to become an enemy of what we represent, well, I'm going to aim at the most critical infrastructure. And centuries ago, it was about taking, guns and artillery and so on. And today, you can do that. You can try at least to do that via IT, with the benefit of also you can prepare well ahead of time. You can penetrate well ahead of time, and you can also create a lot of I would say fuzziness and so on. Who is attacking? When someone takes a piece of artillery and shoots, usually you can rapidly know who it is. Today you can really fake it someone else. So it's again. So that's the essence. Why the frequency? And then you are open to all the other ones that can come. So ransomware can be just people looking for money, and then we're just yet other targets, right? All the actors of the. But we have this specificity of a critical infrastructure, and this is why there is really it's very important. I would just complement what I've said about the 2015. Of course, we do whatever we can to avoid, and one of the elements has been mentioned by my colleague is to try to circumvent. As soon as an incident happened, to limit the impact of it, right? So, but it's the kind of things we.
So, and these are the things that we're seeing in the network code specifically for the electricity sector. Enhanced reporting obligations, incident reporting, also in the more broader the NIS directive as well. So you have to report first of all within 24 hours, and then within 72 hours, much more detailed reporting. So all of these are key developments, across that we're seeing, and closer sharing of information. Of course, these things happen in very highly confidential settings as well, because of the sensitivity of the data. I did see a question coming in there, an interesting one, which was closer to ourselves as citizens, and if we could pull those up again, it was one to do with the smart meters. So what can the hackers do with these smart meters? So the data from the smart meters, what can they do with this? How exposed are we? Peter, could I ask you that one?
Yeah. Well, it depends. I think from what perspective the hackers are trying to make their exercise, but you can reason from various objectives they want to pursue. If they want to have societal unrest, they will just, like it was illustrated before, generate misinformation. If they want to block the system, they will just turn off, in a way, the devices behind the meter or the meter itself. So there are lots of things you can do with it. So it's very important to protect, but also be resilient in when it is hacked. And perhaps to elaborate on that, it was mentioned also the 2015 incident, but others as well. It's not to frighten, but imagine to have a black start. It's really very complicated, so we need a lot of exercise, and not experience, hopefully, but exercise there, to make sure that we find the right way to restore as well. So, but on the smart meter as such, you can do various things, but for the system as a whole, I think the most critical would be to block other devices behind the meter, or to have other effects into the grid.
Okay, I'm just looking at the third question here on the screen, which is an interesting one, and it points the finger to all of us, I think. And it's asking, how often does your institution work together with municipalities, CSOs, Citizens Association, to raise awareness on citizens' energy awareness about cybersecurity? So, anything you're doing in the DSOs or the TSOs on that? Or is your focus more on your members?
Yeah, I would say from our members that are closely located to our customers, they inform and educate on the risks of the system and the cybersecurity protection that you could give yourself. So I don't think it's really in the hands of the DSO entity, but we share best practices on that. But I think it's more like a local communication.
Okay, it's an interesting topic. Paula, what about the European Commission? Is there a scope maybe when the new directives come into place that we could do a little bit more to share and increase awareness among citizens as well as to how we can better protect ourselves? Because these issues raise all sorts of things about data protection, information. You know, there's a host of issues that come with digitalization.
Yeah, and you will see in this action plan that we will put forward that one key pillar is citizens, is really, as we said, the empowerment of citizens, and with it comes education, information, communication. So a clear element in order to make sure really that, as I also said before, that everyone knows how to protect herself and himself in an increasingly digitalized world.
Okay, Konstantinos, do you have any tips for us, maybe, as to how we can all play our part in making, say, the energy systems more secure?
Tips in terms of, in general, tips or for citizens?
For citizens, for us as citizens.
EUSEW has issued from time to time cyber hygiene police, where we have the basics, so to speak, concerning cybersecurity. And I think this is one way to start. Also, EUSEW is working together with small and medium enterprises in general, and they develop cyber hygiene programs. Also, EUSEW works a lot on awareness raising by organizing Cyber Europe, which is a well-known awareness and capacity building activity across Europe. And EUSEW also has a targeted team for awareness raising, which task is to develop, campaigns to approach the citizens concerning basic cybersecurity measures.
Okay, so a lot happening there, citizen-facing too. And there's a question here that a lot of people are interested in. What about cyber peace building to increase society awareness and preparedness against attacks and social engineering? Konstantinos, do you have anyone? I think you're best placed on that one.
I think what I said before here applies as well, because all these campaigns that I mentioned before, we have a specific unit team that deals with capacity building. We organize cybersecurity exercises. This is a Cyber Europe exercise that we develop every 2 years with for different sectors. I think energy, it was some time ago that we organized an exercise for the energy sector. Under the network code, EUSEW will, together with NCOE and EUDSO entity, will have exercises every year, regional, at the corporate level, at the regional level, and at EU level. So I think also that this dimension is also well covered in the network code, in the common network code, where the stakeholders like NCOE and EUDSO collaborate with EUSEW and TASER to develop these capacities for the operators.
Okay, we're fairly focused on the cyber issues here, but there's an interesting question there as well on renewables and increasing renewable penetration. How are you seeing that develop? Peter and Paula, I'll ask you both this. Maybe Paula first.
Yes, well, you can look at that from various perspectives, but I think if we go away a bit from cyber, it is obvious that the high penetration of renewables requires a lot of flexibility in the grid, both from demand and supply side. So investing in smartening the grid and finding mechanisms to bring supply and demand into balance also at a local level is an exercise that is ongoing. And also on that one, we are currently developing together with ACER and the Commission new guidelines for a network code on flexibility to be delivered. I'm not exactly sure, end of this year, beginning of next year. It will depend a bit on how we can accelerate. But I think that is a very important project to enable and to create the good conditions to have even more renewables injecting into the grid.
Okay. And Paula, do you want to add anything to that? You spoke earlier about consumers and the role they have to play as well. So seeing more microgeneration, I imagine, and
Yes, and a lot is going on there in terms of really the rolling out of renewables in a way that it can be appropriated by everyone. A huge potential still of energy communities, a huge potential in terms of the own production of electricity through solar panels. This is something that is being promoted both in regulatory terms, really trying to facilitate this for consumers, but also again in terms of information communication, because often what happens is consumers have the rights, but they don't necessarily know about it, or don't know necessarily how to implement it. And we've seen, it's very interesting to see how far have we gone in terms of really making the most out of producing own electricity, feeding it back into the grid, and there are big differences within the EU, even though the rules are the same. So a lot has to be done there also in terms of informing and awareness raising.
okay. So with the energy transition, we're seeing really the role of consumers is evolving, and we're even using new words that we didn't have before, like prosumers. And so, can you imagine? Will we be at a stage where all consumers are engaging as actively in the energy markets, be it as individuals or as energy communities? Peter, that's a question for you, I think. What are you seeing?
Yes, well, I think there are ample opportunities. At the other hand, we also need to take a look at the interest of consumers, either to participate or not. So I think it is also, it was introduced by Paula before, that we need some further education and information to show the possibilities there. I think that from another dimension, we should also be aware that it's not so easy to participate in all occasions, right? So it will also depend a little bit on where you are, either in the grid or in, for instance, what type of city and what type of energy system exactly is in your location. But one thing is sure, there is a wider, it is a lot more potential than we are using now. So let's first unlock that potential and then see whether everybody is participating or not, but we should take away any bottleneck there and stimulate people to take part.
Okay. I'm looking at another interesting question 2 here on your screen. What about this winter? A lot has been done across member states, the Commission driving this as well in terms of preparing for winter. But what about attacks? Can we expect worst case scenarios? Pipelines to Norway destroyed, for example. Any predictions there? Konstantinos?
As I said, and this comes as complementary to what Nicolas was saying before, for the criticality of the sector. We know very well that weaponization of energy sector by Russia will be the main focus for the coming months. So we could expect that ransomware will be one of the highest top-level threats against power grids, because cybercrime as a service has become very trendy, so to speak. And we will see that these attacks will be somehow Russia will take advantage of this in order to push to put more pressure to the member states, and in order to avoid sanctions that Europe tries to impose.
Please, Paula.
You cannot predict. You can only prepare. Prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And that's what we've been doing for over a year now.
But we see that cybercrime is on the rise. So that means more preparedness, particularly in the situation we're in now. So, and I think it's reassuring to find out today what the network grid operators are doing, the EU agency, and the Commission and the member states in terms of securing solid energy supply for us for winter and for the years ahead. I'm going to wrap up now. I mean, I think we appreciate the interconnectivity between these three topics, energy transition, digital transition, and cybersecurity. And I want to hand over now to our Master of Ceremonies, Anna. She's just going to have a quick word. And thank you all for your very active participation this evening. Please, Anna.
Thank you very much, Una. If I can have them. There it is. So thank you very much, Una, for facilitating this, I think, very insightful session, and it's been really interesting. It's a perfect way to wrap up the day 2 of the European Sustainable Energy Week 2022. We're already halfway through the policy conference, so I cannot believe the time's been running by so fast. We've wrapped up the second thematic block and the last one of today, digitalization. And we have heard it from several speakers today, right? No energy transition without digitalization. And there's so many opportunities, but also many challenges ahead that we need to address together. Now, just to wrap up, as I mentioned earlier, in case you have missed any of the sessions today, you will be able to replay them on the online platform. Just click on the session you are interested in. And for instance, this one, in maybe 5 minutes, it will be already readily available. The online platform, as I said, will stay open, so you can continue networking and requesting meetings with other attendants at the conference. And we will be back tomorrow at 9 a.m. We will kick off our next thematic block on energy efficiency here in the plenary in the De Gasperi room. And for those of you staying in Brussels or who are in Brussels today, your day is not over yet, because I mentioned earlier, we have now, starting at 6 p.m., our digitalization drinks. So I forward to see many of you there. And to everyone, we'll see each other tomorrow.